everybody again, and now we're facing this way. And it's interesting because Tanya was just reminding me that we're in the month of Adar. The month of Adar is the last month of the biblical year. We celebrate now Rosh Hashanah, right? Probably that's what you thought in your mind, wait a minute, Rosh Hashanah, the head of the year is in September, right? The high holidays and Yom Kippur. But actually, biblically, when the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, mentions the first month, it is the month after Adar. It didn't have a name. Before the Babylonian exile, the Hebrew months did not have names. It's just first, second, third. That's how we do it. Even the days of the week, they're just literally first, second, third, because we're counting towards something. So the month of redemption, which is Nisan, which is next month, would be the month of literally what we're here, what we've gathered here to talk about, which is the redemption and coming out of Egypt. There are rabbis who say that the sole mission of Israel and the people in the world is constantly leaving Egypt. But what's also important about this month is the month of Purim. You've heard of the month of Purim, the holiday Purim? We dress up. It's the only day that we are mandated to be intoxicated.
Such a law.
Because it's about, for a minute, for one day, to lose control. That you are so intoxicated that you really are not capable of distinguishing between good and evil, between Mordecai and Haman. Because on that day, really, God decided. And Tanya also reminded me that it's about accepting God's judgment. Purim means the lot, to cast a lot and see what comes out. And it's the day, it's the book that does not mention one name. And actually the rabbis originally didn't want to include it in the canon because it does not mention the name of God. So it's the one book in the whole Bible that does not mention the name of God. But this is exactly the point, to understand the hiddenness of God, God's hand, and understanding that the world, as in Hebrew the word for world, is hidden. And Esther means Hester. It means hidden. So the whole book and the whole idea is the hidden. And I'll finish with it because I'm glad you brought it up, and I'm happy to always introduce a few minutes of the class answering somebody's question. But what ties it also is that it tells us that where we have been broken, we will be healed. So our lot, right, we want to accept God's judgment. But Mordecai told Esther, who was now the wife of Ahasuerus, that if you are not going to help, and maybe you came for that moment in your whole life to help now your people, if you're not going to risk your life, in a sense, going to the king now and said, listen, there's a lot of anti-Semitism going outside. And if you're not going to do it, the help will come from somewhere else. But you and your family are going to suffer. And the idea is that we have to make that state of mind of accepting God's judgment before we can go into the month of the redemption. And it's telling us that redemption happened then on this month, And it's going to happen again on this month. So let's hope that it's going to happen this year. And the hidden, hand of God. In the Egypt, leaving Egypt and receiving the 10 Commandments, the people of Israel said, we will do and we will listen. But it's telling us, the Talmud, the oral tradition tells us that only on Purim, the people of Israel accepted fully the commandment of Mount Sinai. So it's all really, it's tying in together. And finally, the word Purim is holier than Kippur. The word for Yom Kippur, the Day of Judgment in the Bible, is Kippurim, Yom HaKippurim, and Ke in Hebrew is as. So the Talmud tells us that actually Purim is holier than Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the year. Why? Because on Yom Kippur we tremble, right, before God. And that's like the Mount Sinai experience, we tremble. But when do we really accept? Not on the day that we marry. That's the marriage. It's when you renew your vows sometime later. Say, you know what? That was a good move. And for the Jewish people, it happened on this month. And this year, it's a pregnant year. There are 2 months of Adar. Because we follow the lunar calendar. We follow the moon. And we received the first commandment when we left Egypt that night. God told us, this is the first of your year. So that first month of the full moon, it was the full moon, but that month is going to be the head of the month for you. So the real Rosh Hashanah, biblically, is going to be after this. So we always have to adjust to the solar calendar. So we have to push every about 3 to 4 years the month of Nisan into the spring, because Passover and redemption always has to occur in the spring. Why? Anybody? I'll entertain a thought here. Yeah, why does it have to be in the spring? There are a few answers, but one very important theologically for both Jews and Christians.
New life, like a new covenant, like a new...
Beautiful, a new covenant. It's go ahead.
Maybe in springtime, when they fled Egypt, the tides were higher or lower. So when they were crossing through the marsh areas, the tides were very low. And then this became...
And then coming. You're both on, So, Father. What is it?
Herding of the lambs.
Okay, the lamb, it's the first covenant that the people of Israel had with God in Egypt, and they afterwards circumcised, and that was the second one. So good, because it happened on the day of the plague of the death of the firstborn. So you all, yes,
Have to do with new light?
new light?
Light.
Life.
L-I-G-H-T.
Yeah, light and life, which is pretty much the same, which is absolutely. So exactly that. Yes, Tom?
But you're also coming into a season of abundance.
Very good.
Of what?
You're coming into a season of abundance. So you're all correct. And the theological common denominator to all of this, which you definitely agree with, and it's both our ultimate goal, Jews and Christians, the resurrection. The resurrection of life is our ultimate. And that's what we're here to say. Life is infinite. Eheyeh asher eheyeh. God tells Moses, when he asks him his name, I will be as I will be. Which means I'm always there. This is something Don taught me yesterday when we were preparing for today. I never thought about that angle, that when God said to Moses in the burning bush, I am what I am, that's how it's translated normally to English, but it's not literal. The literal translation from Hebrew will be, the conjugation will be eheye asher eheye. I will be as I will be, which means I'm always with you, but I will appear in different forms, and you will have to recognize me all the time. We have a phrase, and normally in most synagogues, Holy Ark, it would say, I see God in front of me always. And really, and this is what, again, it's common between Jews and Christians, we believe that this is the only assurance in life for us as human beings. The only assurance we really have, and it's scary, that everything we see is just a window dressing. It's God. And God alone will save you when you need. And Egypt, what we're talking about today, and I promise that we will get there finally, says Moses.
Look what happened to him.
So, but in Egypt, the hand of God is not hidden, right? The hand of God is very strong. That is why they couldn't accept it ultimately. Because you have to accept it out of love, out of happiness. And Purim is a happy occasion. So, very holy time. Thank you, Tanya, for making me preface this. Yes?
In wintertime, the trees look dead, but life is hidden. And in the springtime, the life becomes known. But
Eventually, right. But the real relationship is that we see God when He's hidden. That's really, and what the way Don phrases it is that it's the ultimate love, and any feeling has to be experiential. It can't be intellectual alone. I think it has to be somewhat intellectual in order to sustain itself in a system. But yes, that when God said, let there be light, that was the initial ignite, which is, it lives on its own. That's its own experiential feeling. Don, you want to say something before we start?
Yeah, couple of things. When we say that God is always present, which is part of giving of His name. If you ever go through the Old Testament and you notice that the Old Testament very seldom, if ever, uses the phrase, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It's always the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Why? It's the same God but manifested in three different ways. So the presence of God, okay, is manifested to those three, if you will. It's the same God, but it's the total presence of God, that God is present to each one in each generation, and so on and so forth. There are a couple of other things that come into play, but we'll get to them if we ever get started.
That won't be your bullet debate. So the other idea there too, also with the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, that each generation has to claim their relationship with God. And I like the expression, God does not have grandchildren. He has only children. So you have to have your relationship with God. So Abraham had his, Isaac had his, and Jacob had his. And of course, it's the same God, but each one had to have that relationship. That was essential. Not to be that I'm living off my grandmother's prayers and faith, you know. And please keep praying for your kids, for sure. But that's what has to happen, you know, that understanding that personal encounter with God. So hopefully we're going to be seeing this in the scriptures now as we begin. We're going to, you want to start with a prayer or anything? Or start with a prayer?
Okay.
Yeah.
We have a prayer that is always good when you start a new venture. And it's I'll say it and then I'll translate it. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehecheyanu v'kiyamanu v'higi'anu lazman hazeh. Thank you, God, King of the universe, who sustained us and brought us to this moment. And may this moment be blessed, and just as we prove the resurrection, how do you prove to someone that there's a resurrection? You show them exactly behind you the dead trees, but they're really not dead. They'll come back in the spring. Okay, with that, so those of you who have the books, but otherwise you can listen. So what we'll do is we'll read the text, but we'll really spend more time on concepts that will arise. So the book of Exodus begins with, and these are the names of the children of Israel who were coming to Egypt with Jacob. And then each man and his household came. So it'll list the tribes. We don't have to go over that. But the book of Exodus starts with, it's the only book of the 5 books of Moses that begins with the hooking letter. It's and. So it means that it's hooked to Genesis. And we kind of touched upon it last time. I'm just reminding us that it is really the book of redemption. Genesis is the book of creation, and Exodus is the redemption. So there's a phrase in Hebrew that says if there's no flour to make bread, meaning there's no bread, there's no Torah. You're not free to learn, right? To study. You have to always first satisfy that basic need. But the full verse then says, if there's no Torah, there's no bread. Which means that if there's no redemption in this life, there's really no good news, right? For you, the gospel, it's really, then what's the point? Right? So we have to believe, and the national anthem of Israel is the hope. You know, the Jewish people definitely went through a few iterations that we had to master the concept of hope. And we still do. So, then in verse 8, what happens, it's the children of Israel were fruitful, teemed, increased, and became strong, very, very much so. Very, very much so. The only time that the Bible really uses very, first of all, it's very scarce. Like the Queen of England, Queen Elizabeth II, of good memory, did not use the exclamation point at all, ever. She really didn't believe in the exclamation point, and my editor actually doesn't believe in them either, just in like special occasions. I'll put exclamation point basically every other word if I could. But this would be an exclamation point, right? So the Bible is very scarce with very. So the first time we hear very, of course, it's the day that man was created on Friday, on the 6th day. So very, very much That means, I mean, there are stories in the Talmud that they were almost like what the midwives would later say to Pharaoh, that they are like fish. You know, they are like mammals with litters. So they really increased a lot, and that scared, I guess, the people and the Egyptians. So he became with them, and a new king arose over Egypt. Okay, so a new board who did not know of Joseph. Okay, that's already almost impossible. Joseph was probably the most famous person in the world back then, more than the pharaohs probably, the one who saved Egypt from the famine. So it really, he didn't want to know, because that means that he's not connected to the tradition. He's going to start something that not in God's image, but in his own image. And we know how that goes. So he said to his people, the Pharaoh, behold, the children of Israel are more numerous and stronger than we. Come, let us outsmart it, lest it become numerous, and it may be that if a war will occur, it too may join our enemies and wage war against us and go up from the land. Okay? The very important concept, and we touched upon it last time, that Egypt in the Bible, in the Torah, really in other references later on, it's going down. It's always going down. When Abraham went down to Egypt, Joseph went down to Egypt. And Aliyah is when you ascend. When you go to Israel, for example, people call it Aliyah when they immigrate to Israel, right? I'm sure you've heard the term. It means to go up. So that is very important, because Egypt is tight. And in the world of astronomy, as tight as the planet or the star is, right, it's heavier. And it could be a very small star or planet, but if it's very condensed, right, it's heavy. So Egypt is always down. And Egypt is everything that draws you down. Not just the place, Egypt. Anything that narrows on your life. Egypt means narrow. Okay, very important terminology to remember.
Just interesting too, geographically, I'm very struck with that most of Egypt, all the Egyptian people really do live along the Nile River. You know, so it is very tight and narrow. So even geographically, pay attention to how things are created, and all these people are so tightly tied to the Nile River, and you go a couple of miles away and then you're just into the desert. So haven't been to Egypt yet, but I'm hoping to go. You have something?
Okay. I hope only physically.
Yeah, I'm going to open up my comment by saying, so what? So what? And I say that in all seriousness because sometimes we come together in a group and we forget to try to apply, especially when it comes to the scriptures, apply what is happening here to what's going on in our own lives and today. So we have to remember the ongoing message of the Exodus. So let me give you an example of what Gadi was just saying. First of all, the language that's used, the Israelites, what does it say? They filled the land. It reminds people of the command that God gave, to fill the world and multiply. Okay, so that, in a certain sense, this is what's connecting Genesis to Exodus, number one. It's interesting, too, that the Pharaoh, or the people of Egypt, lacked a prior relationship with Joseph, and their increased growth, the growth of the Israelites, scared the hell out of the Egyptians. Now let's stop and think for a moment. The fear of these immigrants fueled the fear that would continue. It's interesting that it says that the Pharaoh told the people, he didn't keep this to himself, but he announced to the people, hey, they're a danger. So what he's beginning to do is fuel the fire of paranoia, of fear. Okay? What fuels fear today? It's conspiracy theories, it's fear of immigrants, and so on and so forth. You're never going to tell the Israelites that there was no such thing as slavery. Okay? It just doesn't compute. So as we're going through this, try to, in your own minds, try to relate this whole idea of got to use the word resurrection. Well, it's the same thing as coming into freedom. And this,
I don't want to interrupt. The doors on the front of this church are locked all the way around the building. They can hear your voice down there somehow, but people can't get in. So we have to walk all around, bang on the doors. Nobody around to open them. Can we get somebody to maybe open those doors in case you've got people who are going to leave if they don't get in the building?
Well, they're supposed to come in back here, but okay.
Yeah, but there's no sign, Father. There's nothing that says, here's how you get into this meeting.
Would you mind just letting them know this time and we'll take care of it the next time? Okay. The timing that we're doing this series really is interesting. We didn't plan that this is going to be the atmosphere, but it's all true. And every Pharaoh was the first anti-Semite in the Bible, in a sense. But it's not really yes, it's a Jewish story, it's a Hebrew story, but it's not, this is the whole point. This is a universal story too. And that's why, so joining this story is not taking away from anybody else, because it's your story too. It's everybody's story. I know this is your story as Christians and Jews, of course, but I'm saying to the world, it's everybody's story. And this universality begins here. And what is the universality? That in every oppression, there's always the rhetoric that is starting to pump in little by little. And we compare it to the serpent in the Garden of Eden when God said he is the most cunning, right? So he's the most quiet. You're not going to notice until you're bitten. So that idea that how slavery comes to the world, this is the lesson that God wanted us to learn regardless. This was already a prophecy. It wasn't that just the Egyptians did something wrong. Yes, God used them as a tool to teach us so he can then punish them anyway for something else. That's what at least, the Talmud is one of the ideas. Why are you punishing the Egyptians if they were just part of of God's prophecy to you anyway? So, but, and this is a very important nuance to understand also this redemption, is that God didn't say the name of the nation that they will be enslaved by. He also didn't say that they will kill them, right? That they'll cross that line, that God will have to intervene with his strong hand. But the education for the Jewish people, the Hebrews, was supposed to include already some sort of slavery. But God to Abraham does not mention the name of the nation that will enslave them. Which means it's a very important concept in life. Yes, you think that, you want to punish somebody, right? Okay, yes, agree. But you have to also say, you know what, maybe I shouldn't be the tool to punish that person. Because even being the tool to be used to punish somebody, it's costly. So whether you're right or wrong, you have to incur some damages. So it's better to not start a fight if you don't have to, right? So, but the idea here that slavery doesn't just happens overnight, right? It happens when we're sleeping, when we're not noticing that one step at a time we are put more boundaries, right? So everybody wants security, but everybody wants freedom, right? But especially speaking to Americans, of course, freedom is if without freedom, right, give me death. What is the point? So God wants us to learn freedom through slavery. And the Egyptians are the tool, and they chose themselves, so to speak, to be that tool. So, but they're going very slow. And the word for that is in Hebrew, where it says, on page 295 now, verse 11, so they appointed taskmasters over it in order to afflict it with their burdens. It built strong city of pharaohs, Pitom and Ramses, but as much as they would afflict it, so it would increase and so it would spread out. So our rabbis compare this to the squeezing of the oil from the olives. The only way to get the oil out is to press the olive. It's called olive press. And it's hurting the olive, right? But it brings the oil out of it. And bringing the oil out of it, and again, we may not go exactly in order of concept, and maybe it'll appear a little later, but just have that, in mind, that what you said before, light, it's about resurrection, the bringing back light, bringing back life. That's what it's all about. And everything that has to do with the second part of the book of Exodus has entirely to do with light. How so? The Ark of the Covenant. The word Aron in Hebrew, which is not the same word as the Ark of Noah or Moses. This is a different name for that. That's Teva. But the word for the Holy Ark is Aron. And the root of the word is Or, which is light, or Ur, which is fire. Same idea, right? So the person who minister the light is Aaron, right? In Hebrew is Aharon. Comes from the same root, light. And I can go on and on and on. The Torah itself is called light. So that's what it's all about. So the oil means that as much as you're pressed, the Jews have kept their religion even more, right? And their faith. And the oil came out, but they kept the light with the oil.
I always like to make the Christian connection here too. Of course, this idea of being squeezed. Even though in their being squeezed, they actually prospered. But remember that the Gethsemane, we know what that word is. Okay, the Garden of Gethsemane is the olive press, the place where the olives are pressed. So on the Mount of Olives, the Garden of Gethsemane is at the bottom of the hill. They would drag the olives down, and then they would be put into the olive press at the bottom of the hill, and there they would be able to, squeeze, and crush the olives. And And just another little detail, it's amazing why the whole Hanukkah story took so long for them to get the oil ready, that you have to take just the first drop from the olive, the first drop. It can be used in the temple. Just another little detail, just one drop at a time. So for them to press individually each olive to get the one drop of oil that could be put into the menorah. So this is why it took so long for them to get the stuff prepared, but it lasted the 8 days. So all these are all, one image floats into the other, olives crushing, pressure. It's all related. Everything is related.
Everything.
Is that kind of like first fruits then? Just taking that one first drop? Like
What's that?
if they only take the first drop, is that kind of along the lines of bringing your first fruits?
Yeah, it's like the first fruits. Yeah, it's the same idea. Give the best, the purest. So the first drop is extra virgin. Just one drop. That's it. The first one that comes out. So that would be what would be used then in the temple. So this type of attempt to purify and separate.
Tell them about the village in Nazareth. The Nazareth village.
Yeah.
The ancient village where they do the press and
Those
who come with us to Israel.
Yeah. Yeah, we stop in Nazareth. There's a place called the Nazareth Village, and it's a first century recreation, I guess you'd say, yeah. And it's really quite beautiful. And they dug it up, and it was an area that was just kind of left there. They used it, and they found what is the wine press, that was just where they dumped the grapes and they would step on them. And this little the stone came down, and then they would collect the wine, the grape juice, and so it's from first century. So who do you think was up there?
Maybe next time
With their little feet squishing the grapes, because that would have been a neighborhood project. And we think that in the time of Jesus would have been 200 people maybe in Nazareth. And so this was put in the communal wine press. So there they were stepping on the grapes. It's very important to know with your feet the perfect squeezer, because you don't want to get those seeds of the grapes broken. That'll spoil the wine. So the skin on your feet and the cushiony is like the perfect press for grapes. Now for wine, for olives, that's a whole other process.
But there's a modern hospital right above.
Yeah.
Remember, right?
Yeah, big hospital there.
Yeah.
Yeah, John?
No, I said.
No,
Yes, Jack.
You're giving examples of relating olive press, wine press. Could you would it be a relationship in creating the chrism?
Well, yeah, that's where we get our idea of chrism. It's going to be something special. It's olive oil, plus the fragrances and perfumes that are added. So it's very biblical. I mean, this is the kings of Israel were anointed with oil, and at our baptism we're anointed as well. So priest, prophet, and king. So oil is used, throughout the church. Olive oil.
Okay. So we'll continue with the text, and the word. I want to get to the word that is used over and over to describe a process that draws you in very slowly. And the word in Hebrew is parich. Parich is literally means hard work, but if you split it to two words, according to the rabbis, it's perach, a soft mouth. So with a soft mouth, they brought us into slavery, one step at a time. And that could be in every process of enslavement in our lives. It's you use something or a certain service, you become dependent on it and become addicted to something. I mean, these are all Egypt.
And many have used the example, put the frog in the pot. You've heard this story, and you just turn the heat on a little bit. So that's the soft mouth idea. Nice and easy. It's okay. The water, you'll enjoy it. It's nice. Go in the water. and hang out there for a little while. Just turn it up a little bit, and a little bit more. And eventually, of course, the frog will die. The temperature just goes up nice and slow. So this is the process that's happening now here with the Israelites in Egypt in this place, place of tightness.
So the verse is, the Egyptians enslaved the children of Israel with crushing harshness. They embittered their lives with hard work, with mortar and with bricks, and with every labor of the field. All their labors, it's verse 14. All their labors that they performed with them were with crushing harshness. The Talmud says that, again, Talmud, I'll use it many times, it's the oral tradition that explains, we mentioned last time, it's about 800 years of rabbis deliberating. So about this text. So we really learn everything we know about from there. So what they say is that the 10 plagues that will come later on, each has to do with some of those tasks that the Egyptians enslaved them by, that this verse says. So, for example, the water, the plague of water, the blood, is because they had to go and retrieve water for them all the time. And sometimes they would give them just tasks, meaningless tasks. Just, dig a hole and then, cover it. So just to enslave their spirit. Okay, so in verse 15, the king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, of whom the name of the first was Shifra, and the name of the second was Pu'ah. And he said, when you deliver the Hebrew women, and you see them on the birth stool, if it is a son, you are to kill him. And if it is a daughter, she shall live. Okay, I know if you haven't heard that before, of course your jaw will drop, and of course this is very cruel. There's a midrash. A midrash is a story in the oral tradition in the Talmud that speaks about this timing that when Pharaoh decreed that the boys should die, Moses' father divorced his mother because he said, I don't want to have any more children. I don't want to kill them. Right? Sounds like a reasonable argument. And then Miriam, his daughter, came to him and said, well, Father, you, by divorcing mother, you have decreed something that is even more harsher than Pharaoh's. What is it about? She said, Pharaoh only decreed on the boys, and you're decreeing on everybody else, meaning women. But the point is, don't give up. Don't succumb to this. Let God, do his part. Okay.
I'll just continue with the reading here. So it says, where are we? But the midwife, verse 17, but the midwives feared God, and they did not do as the king of Egypt spoke to them, and they caused the boys to live. The king of Egypt summoned the midwives and said to them, why have you done this thing, that you have caused the boys to live? And the midwife said to Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are unlike the Egyptian women, for they are experts. Before the midwife comes to them, they have given birth. It's interesting that I'd just like to make a comment to commend the women, first of all. Pharaoh is acting against the population increase by forcing these two midwives to do what he wants them to do. But it's the emphasis on the fear of God, okay, that leads the midwives to civil disobedience. And that's exactly what was going on here. We would use the word civil disobedience. And one of the commentators say, before any male leadership appears, the two women know how to act rightly without God telling them. There was this sense. Right? And another commentator said, the women are the first model of spirituality presented in Exodus. They do not receive communication from God, yet they know what is right and they act on that knowledge. And they differ from Moses and Aaron and from Isaac and from Jacob. So the element there is that the women had this sense that there was something wrong and this was against God's will, and they stood up. And that's why the women are so important in this part of the book of Exodus.
There's another hidden message here that is planted in their names. And names always mean something. There's a real difference, the cultural difference between the Jewish mindset, and I think usually in America people don't pay attention too much to names, and many times it's just a name. You never hear a Jewish person says it's just a name, ever, because the name is the essence, and Hashem, right? We call the name is to God. We refer to God. So their names mean many things, but first of all, it means that they work together as a team. But their names also indicate that they each had their own task in the delivery process. One was actually delivering, and shifra means she embittered the kid. She'll maybe clean it, put it in the clothing, and then the other one will attend to his crying. The boy or the girl's crying. So they were a team, and they had these names of giving. So they were really the first ones, and some midrash said that these are the mother and sister of Moses. This is Yocheved, his mother, the mother, and Miriam, the sister. But it could be also other women. It is, as we mentioned last time, this is the book of women. This is almost, Genesis was the book of the forefathers. This is the foremothers. We see according to the Talmud, the men were depressed. That method of hard work worked. And they were depressed, and they were going to disappear in their bitterness. That's why we eat the bitter herbs. Next month we're going to have the Seder. We eat the bitter herbs to remind ourselves how bitter it has been, or it was, and how we have overcome this. So the women take front stage here. So when we continue, it says the king of Egypt summoned the midwives and said to them, "Why have you done this? This thing that you have caused the boys to live?" And again, what Don said about that they are very fast, and that God made them houses. That was their reward. He made them houses. And this is again, another terminology, because how do you achieve freedom is when you have, first of all, your home, your house, right? You have to have that shelter, the sanctuary, and on and on. But what happens for people who don't have their home, or they're renting, or they're dwelling otherwise, or the example is of the Jewish people, that they were exiled from their land, from their house, right? And every time we build the temple, it's called the house, right? Second house, first house that was built by King Solomon, second house built by those who returned from the exile. And a house is not just literally the house. What it means is that they have a people. They have a system. They have something that they belong to. You know, like the word Catholic, that word that's together. It's, everybody there's something that is universal that we all share. So that's the important message in that. So houses, because what happened with the Jewish people left or were exiled, or the temple was destroyed, then the rabbis taught us a new concept, which was the four walls of halakha. 4 walls of halakha, meaning a house, but it really is not a physical house. It's halakha. The terminology for halakha is Jewish law. Jewish law. But it also means to walk. So Jewish law, biblical law, is how we walk with God. So the law is the house. If you have no law, you have no house. And that's what the rabbis taught us, and it helped the Jewish people survive through exile. Is that we had the 4 walls of halakha, of the Jewish law. That we all kept Shabbat at the same time, whether you were in Yemen or in Poland. We faced the same place, which was the destroyed temple, yet still a holy place. So it taught us how to be in our house, not being in our house. That is full freedom. Very hard to achieve. But that is really the goal. I'll give you a little bit of an anecdote with it. It's a nice, actually, comparison. That the high priest's breastplate resembles the back of the turtle. It has the breastplates, but they're the 12 tribes. Okay, God is telling us something here. Recess?
Sorry.
No, that's all right. So, which means that we, like the turtle that carries its house on its back, this is like the Jewish people. What's that? The plant? The wandering Jew. The wandering Jew, right? That is the idea that Jews, not intentionally and not willingly, have been displaced many times and had to carry their house. The whole story of Fiddler on the Roof is the story that they're leaving now Tepka and they're going to go somewhere else, and they take their house, literally, right, whatever they can carry, with them. So the rabbis tell us when the temple was destroyed that, and by the way, of course, rabbinic Judaism, right, that followed the destruction of the temple, because the rabbis told us, this is the law. Take it, this is your house now. It was the same time that Christianity was born, right? It was the same time. So the modern Judaism, or the Judaism that is practiced today, Jews that you meet today, are all descendants of those Jews, of rabbinic Jews. And there's a whole story when on the pilgrimages we go over the places where the Sanhedrin had to move from Jerusalem and so forth. But so this is the concept of houses. It's so important because that really is the summation of the book of Exodus, is how to live with our law away from home or taking our home on our backs. How do we see it for the first time after the revelation in Sinai? It took 3 days, and God said to the Israelites, no more. Go. Go. Take the revelation, put it in the ark, right? The container of light. Take the light they just received from heaven, put it in the container of light, and walk with it through the generation. Have a system that you can adapt and reinterpret the law as you go. That is full freedom. And I'll conclude at least this part by saying it's the only holy vessel in the ark that we're commanded not to remove the staves when it finally even arrives its permanent place, as we know later on in Jerusalem. Why? Some would say, if there's a war, you take it, you run with it. Yes. But also on a spiritual level, it's that the Torah and the law has to keep interpreted. Because if it's not interpreted all the time, it's stale. And God does not want us to eat stale bread. The only common denominator between all type of breads in the world is that they go stale the next day. And that's the manna. And when King Solomon says at the end of the book of wisdom, he said, what is a woman of valor? A woman of valor is a woman that does not eat stale bread. And he calls it the bread of laziness. Not making fresh bread. It's very hard, but fresh bread. Right? Can't beat fresh bread. And that's how God wants us to live. God is telling us it's not only on bread that the man lives, right? Alone. You need something, so fresh bread is definitely the first step. And that's what he's trying to train us through the desert, and this is what we'll see. The desert is now going to be the training ground. We're not there yet, of course, but it's going to be the training ground of how to believe in God. Give us today our daily bread. Which is, by the way, a kosher Jewish prayer. We can pray it together. We believe in it. So believing in God is the manna. And that's the ultimate freedom, to believe that only God alone is there for us in this world. Everything is around right?
Just want to talk about an anecdote. When the very first meeting that we had of Project Genesis with the lecture series, we had, thanks to the generosity of the pastor, we had in a Unitarian Universalist church. And Gadi and I were sitting around and saying, okay, we're going to have all these different people come to hear us. We were very optimistic. We figured 25. We ended up with 93. So, but I can remember sitting down with him and saying, what prayer would we say to begin the session? And after thinking about it, the best kosher prayer we had was the Lord's Prayer. Okay. There's nothing strictly Christian about the Lord's Prayer. Right? It's the prayer that Jesus, the Jew, told us to pray. So, I mean, if it's good enough for Jesus, it's good enough for the Jews and the Christians on the North Fork.
And it's universal.
And it's universal. So, yes, if you're involved in an interfaith meeting and you want to pray a prayer, the Lord's Prayer is the way to go. That was our very first session.
So before Don interrupted me, I was just going to finish.
Somebody has to have him stop.
The word mana means faith.
But it also means, what is it? Mana, what is it? Okay, so but I wanted to ask the question here in my text. Now, again, we have to do the verses. You speak about the verses where you're at when you're reading, to keep everybody on the right page here. But I think we're at verse 21. And in my translation, this is not the Jewish translation, I think this is New American Bible, and it says, and because the midwives feared God, he gave them families.
Right.
The word here is family, so house, family, all right? It's,
People.
So it's amazing to see how, the English will change. So it really is by the translator. And so what I love about being able to do this kind of a study is you're hearing, a couple of different ways. And the Jewish translation in particular, of course, is in English. But, of course, Gadi knows the Hebrew. It's on the other side of the page. If you've got the new Bible, the one we just put out here, you can, we'll be trying to do that as we go through the text. It's fascinating. Every letter, not every word, every letter means something. It has numerical value and meaning. And so this is the, 70 layers, he says, for the text, 70 layers of meaning. So we're just going to kind of dance around here. We're taking our time, but we're just going to make our way through the text. So again, to reiterate now, the enslavement of the people now is happening, and we're moving through the chapter. Okay.
A little bit of mysticism. The word, and kind of that's what it's called in the Capela level of the text. Bayit, the word bayit, which means home or house, is the root of the word is a daughter or a woman. So the bayit really leans on the woman. That's what it's referring to. And there are other references to that in the Bible, that the woman is the center of the house. And that is light also. It's connected to light.
Is that the reason why only the women are able to make the challah bread? The bread, like the women make the challah bread.
The women make certain things are I don't want to get into the law of what the obligation of women and versus men. It depends on also the what denomination you belong to. So I belong now to the conservative movement. I'm a conservative rabbi. So it's fully egalitarian. There's no difference between men and women. The obligations are similar, but traditionally women were in charge of the light. That's why I said it's really, and the most known custom is to light Shabbat candles. And traditionally the woman lit the candles, not because it's her obligation. It's an obligation on the house. There are 613 commandments. And each commandment has a designation. It's not that everybody has to perform 613 commandments. There are commandments for men, commandments for women, commandments on the article of the holy vessel or the house. So lighting Shabbat candle is really a commandment of the house. The house has to have lit Shabbat candles, but traditionally women took that task because they bring light to the house. They're more spiritual. That's how we consider. I mean, I'm not. This is how traditionally we teach that women are there's something in the woman's intuition that is just more spiritual being somehow. And
I just have one little question. The house of David, is that the interpretation of this word house? Like when you say the
yes,
house,
maybe we'll have to figure
the house of David. When you say the house of David, is that it means
the house of David?
Yes.
Oh, okay, the house of, yes, similar ideas. It's a tradition, it's a people of David. It's not just a physical house. I maybe on the architecture story, but I always wanted to be an architect, but I have, many of you know the story in Jerusalem where I went to architectural school and I found myself in the biggest funeral in the history of Israel so far, and I was going against the stream of 500,000 ultra-Orthodox men, and I was secular at that point, just finishing my army service, and I did not get into that school, but I promised myself that I would study Jewish studies wherever I land, and that's how it started at Yeshiva University of New York, and I always say to myself that God wanted me to know what are the real foundations or the real blueprint of a house before I build one. So that really is the point here. The house is the blueprint, the law, what you have. Yeah.
Let me, hold on. Just another, I mean, I've told the story to some people and heard it, but I'm going to tell the line. So in this first description, I said, what happened? How did you get yourself into like being born again? You know, you're a born again Jew. You're really excited with your faith, and you weren't. You were secular, and this is the moment he talks about is he's going against the traffic. All these people coming this way, right? And he's going that way to get to the school. And now this, of course, everybody, when I say the words, so he's puzzled. What's going on? All these people go. And so he grabs somebody by the sleeve. He says, "Excuse me, what's going on here?" And he tells me the quote, "Are you the only Jew in Jerusalem who doesn't know what's going on?" They got the joke. Can you imagine a priest sitting here listening? I'm like, "What did you say?" What did that guy say to you? Holy moly. Are you the only Jew in Jerusalem who doesn't know what's going on? And it turned out he was the chief rabbi of all of Israel. And
He wasn't technically the chief rabbi, but he was the greatest rabbi, which is even a lot more than the chief rabbi.
And then he gets shoved up against the casket or whatever, the hearse coming by, and he's like, "Oh my God, what's happening?" And he said in that reflection that I didn't even know he existed, who he was, that he died or even. So what do they all know that I don't know? They're all coming this way, I'm going that way. So it was a fascinating, that was way back when we heard that story, but go ahead, now you have something else to say. Oh,
For non-Christian people in the audience, that quote comes from the Gospel of Luke, and it refers to Jesus appearing to two men on their way back to Emmaus after the resurrection. And Jesus appears, walks along with these two men, and Jesus asks them, what's going on? And the response of the two Jews was, "Are you the only person in Jerusalem who doesn't know what happened?" So that's the connection. That's one of the reasons why all of our Christian brethren laughed, and our Jewish brethren had no idea what he was talking about.
Yes.
I would just like to interject something to direct it in a truthful manner. The house of David is the lineage of David and the lineage of Jesus. That's what the house of David represents.
Means to you, right, and to us too. They're both. We agree on the Messiah coming from the house of David, or in your case, returning. That would be the first question we'll ask the Messiah.
This is your first time here?
Have you been here before? Yes, Jack.
I find it interesting what you mentioned earlier on, that the book of Exodus is female, it's for the women. Okay. I see a relationship in that when you go to the Gospels, that Jesus is really affiliated quite a bit with the women.
So what Jack is saying, that even Jesus was affiliated with the women, there's something about it. And I have to tell you, it says many times that because of righteous women, Israel was redeemed, right? Because of acts like this, but also that the women are the house, and it says that the Messiah, in some midrashim stories, that he would come, and it's an interesting expression in Hebrew, Ezrat Nashim. So it could be the help of women. He will come, like somehow he would help women, or he would be with women, the side of women. But it also means the section, the women's section, Azarat Nashim. So in the temple, there was the women's section, and in an Orthodox synagogue, the women's section, right, the mechitza in the middle, the dividing wall. It could be anything, but the house, right? It has to come from the house of David.
So we'll just finish the last line of verse 22. Then Pharaoh commanded all his people, every son that is born to the Hebrews you shall cast into the Nile, but you shall let every daughter live. So that completes chapter 1.
Yes. So we thought to continue just a few verses to the daughter of Pharaoh, because the daughter of Pharaoh is the kind of the woman that completes the story, where she retrieves Moses. So chapter 2, a man went from the house of Levi, and he took a daughter of Levi. So that's the continuation of the story when he divorced his wife. Moses' father divorced his mother. That's why the verse is, then he went back and married her. And the woman conceived and gave birth to a son. She saw that he was good. So good is always light. And she hid him for 3 months. She could not hide him any longer. And the Talmud said that because he was also bright, he was shining just when he came down from the mountain, and his face was bright. Same idea. So she couldn't hide him anymore. And so she took him in a wicker basket and smeared it with clay and pitch. She placed the boy in it and placed among the reeds at the bank of the river. His sister stationed herself at a distance to know what would be done with him. Pharaoh's daughter went down to bathe by the river, and her maidens walked along the river. She saw the basket among the reeds, and she sent her maidservant, and she took it. She opened it, and she saw it, the boy, and behold, a youth was crying. He looked like he was all formed, like a youth. She took pity on him and said, "This is this one of the Hebrew boys." So she knew it was a Hebrew boy, yet she still took him in. And it says, his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go summon for you a wet nurse from the Hebrew women, and will nurse the boy for you?" And the daughter of Pharaoh said, "Go." The girl went and summoned the boy's mother, and this is how we'll conclude. Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this boy and nurse him for me, and I will give your pay." So the woman took the boy and nursed him. The boy grew up, and she brought him to the daughter of Pharaoh, and he was a son to her. She called his name Moses, as she said, "For I drew him from the water." This is the place to end for next time, Because the story of redemption always starts with redemption. But what was the first redemption? How far back would you go to find the first redemption? So the Talmud says actually the creation itself is the first act of redemption. Because the creation, right, the book of Genesis, was for the purpose of redemption. And this is what we're here for. So God redeemed somehow, and it starts with a place. He contracted himself to allow room for creation. And that's the first act of compassion, which is the point. And she called him Moses, Moshe in Hebrew, and it's a unique word that means to draw out of water, not draw any from any other place, just from water. It's a unique word, Moshe. So, to give a little insight into the Hebrew, the word Moshe, she called him because I drew him out of the water, right? So you first have to redeem. You redeem yourself. Oh, it somehow has to redeem you. You have to feel compassion in your life to be compassionate to other people, right? So God's, of course, rescuing the people of Israel from Egypt is a big one. Absolutely. But the creation itself, if you really want to go back, the Talmud says that's where it is. That it even gave us room to exist, to have a conversation with him. So Moshe is, we would have expected that his name would be on the passive form, right? Someone who was drawn out of water. But actually his name then instantaneously becomes the active form of drawing out of water. Someone who will draw others out of water. Moshe. Someone who constantly draws people or things or anything out of water. Which means to give birth. To draw something out of water means to give birth. And we will get to those concepts as we go along.
Is there any connection to the idea then of, the waters, God's spirit hovering above the waters, and that was like the chaos, and then drawing out of the chaos comes creation and order out of the chaos. And the waters, certainly it's where we're given birth, of course, but out of the waters now, Moses is going to lead his people even through the sea, going through the water. So just through the chaos, I think, is there a connection to that? The water, the idea of the water, yeah. So it's like
again,
living and death.
And then you tell me that I, keep talking.
You only said 10 words.
I have one thing to add to what you said, and it was about when the daughter, Pharaoh's daughter, looked in the basket.
Mm-hmm.
His mother, Moses' mother, wrapped him in Israelite cloth. And she recognized the Israelite cloth. And then that's how she knew that he was Hebrew.
So the water is leveled. Water is always leveled. And to come out of chaos, you have to level. So that's what water is. It's the rebirth, it's the resurrection, it's the mikvah, it's the, right? Baptism, same idea.
And also, the idea of creation is not creating something out of nothing. The idea of biblical creation is putting order into chaos. Right? And it's very, very interesting that when I was talking to Gadi yesterday about this, when Genesis says that we are made in the image and likeness of God, if you take that in context, what did God just do? But he created the world. So when we say that we are created in the image and likeness of God, the first thing about it is that we are called to be co-creators of the world. So, and everything that entails, all right, we are called to continue the creation of God, not to destroy it. But we seem to have forgotten that these days anyway. There's a couple of other things. We ended with the name of Moses, and I'm going to, an anecdote. I remember, I don't remember much now in my old age, but I remember my first day of high school, 1956. And we had an English teacher who was a curmudgeon. Never forget it. All right? But I can remember as he was going through the names of the kids in the class, one thing that he made very, very, very clear to us, he said, always call somebody by his or her proper name. It is a sign of respect. So I know we kind of, as Gadi said before, we kind of pass over names nowadays. But if you notice in the Bible, how often we are given the meaning of someone's name. So I would ask us, do we all know the meanings of our own name at this point? That's number one. Since our next meeting is going to be April 7th, which is a week after Easter, I want to mention something that we talked about in the beginning, this whole idea of moving towards resurrection and so on. We Christians are celebrating Lent. We're going to end it with we're not going to end it all. It ends with Pentecost. But the great feast of the resurrection. And I would say that in terms of what we have been talking about, we've been talking about liberation and freedom. And resurrection is that moment of freedom in terms of Christian theology. But also remember this, the major virtue that is associated with the resurrection is forgiveness. And it is forgiveness which makes us totally free.